that asked for questions to be answered
Yeah,
in this video,
just
just post
post
them
it.
anywhere. If you're not here live, we'll still answer your questions.
We
Oh, I
will.
might have actually messed that up. We might be live now. So I don't know. My apologies.
Starting
Yeah,
again.
Danny doesn't know, but
I don't
good
know.
morning, everybody.
Sorry. I apologize if that's the case.
Now we've been live for 15 seconds, man. We're
Have
good.
we? Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Danny might have messed it up, but Facebook changed stuff, so it's a lot harder to actually go live with three people now. But do you want to do your announcement again in case people didn't hear
In case people didn't hear before,
it?
that's a great
Hey,
question.
good
Yeah.
morning,
In
Chris
case you
and
didn't hear it,
Bryce
post your comments in this video, post your comments on our other posts or your questions. Post them anywhere because if you can't attend this
and
live, guess
Eric.
what?
Good
We'll still
morning.
answer your questions. Whoa, we got three
Yeah,
early
we will
risers.
answer your questions. Good morning, guys. Nice to
Hmm.
have you all here bright and early. I know it's early for some of you guys. Thank you so much for attending.
Now I know we're
Um,
officially live because we have comments, right?
oh
Yeah.
man.
God.
Hey, we're humans too, people. We're not like
Yeah.
Terminator developers, you know.
Hmm.
That's
So
actually a
that'd be
good thing
pretty
to keep
cool.
in mind too for our topic as well. Which is that you're
Yeah,
just a person.
that we're just human. Well, speaking of topics, good segue there, Danny. Our
Thank you.
topic today is how to ask better questions to become a better developer. And I think this is, to me, this is one of the most frustrating and important topics when it comes to software development because if you guys are in any other software development groups, which I'm sure you are, you
They
must have
just
at this
post
point.
porn.
Well, yes, that's one thing, which isn't a question, like,
Yeah.
but if you are, I'm sure you've seen the guy who's just like written issue with Python.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
Right? So, today's topic is how to actually ask better questions so that you get the answers that you're looking for. Because as developers, we don't want to waste time, right? Like, we don't want to sit around and wait for people to answer. Or most of the time, I mean, we should really talk about that too, is most of the time you can just answer the questions probably on your own. But when
Yeah.
you can't, how do you actually answer a question so that you get a response quickly and people understand what you're asking?
I was gonna say too that your point's really good like that. I think when you're learning on your own too, because everybody's trying to transition careers, right? Like asking questions can be the most important thing to help you level up, get over obstacles and stuff, but it can also be a crutch, like what you
Yes.
mentioned, right? Where as soon as you feel like you don't know something, you immediately go to others to ask questions rather than trying to figure it out and answer it yourself. So I think it goes, you got to be careful. There's a balance too with asking good questions, but also asking questions at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, just asking questions to sort of delay the inevitable, right?
So,
Bryce
so we
said,
live.
how do I get started? I don't know, Bryce. I'm sorry,
Good
man.
question. Good
Good
question.
question.
Yeah. Uh, well, we live at a very interesting time because before the internet, when you had questions, you would look at an encyclopedia. You might go to the
Speculate
library and
wildly.
ask a librarian, speculate wildly. Yeah, ask your
Mhm.
crazy uncle who just had his opinions about everything, whatever it is. But it could have been very difficult to get answers to your questions.
Mhm.
Nowadays, we live in a time where you may not get the right answer, but you can get an answer
On
immediately.
TikTok.
Yeah, on TikTok. Exactly. That's the only place that you should be searching for answers. Uh, but like
It's the only people that have answers.
the go-to, immediate go-to, anytime that you have a question, period, is just Google or ChatGPT and just ask them like you would ask another person.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. Oh,
Bryce said
Bryce?
Stack Overflow has been
Oh,
my go-to, and I can't tell if that's actually
serious?
sarcastic or serious because Stack Overflow does have some good information, but like 90% of it is very old and not
That's
probably
my
the most
problem with
That's
it.
efficient way to actually look up
It
stuff.
used
that's
to
funny.
be, it used to be good back in the day, but it hasn't been. I think that's the problem with it because every time I've tried to use it as a resource, it's outdated. And
Yeah.
like I remember I was looking up something for Django, and like they had a response for like it was like Django 2, and it was like we were on like 5 or 4 or whatever, and it's like it didn't apply anymore. Like
Yeah.
that's
I
one of the
haven't
problems with Stack Overflow.
I haven't seen any like replies recently that have been within the past like 2 years. And I think that's
Yeah,
because there was like a very inverse relationship with the, people starting to use AI and stopping
yeah.
using Stack Overflow. They even show like have charts of that, of like where basically everybody who used Stack Overflow moved to AI because it's just that much more efficient. So
Well,
It
that's
if
an
you
is.
are
interesting
genuinely
point
using
because
that, Bryce, I recommend trying AI because you're going to get quicker, better answers. They're not always perfect either, so take that with a grain of salt. But
No answer is ever perfect though. Whenever I
that's
mean, if
true.
whether you're asking an expert, because like, look, you might ask an expert and it might not be their area of expertise, or they might be using something in an older way or something, and something
Yeah.
developed, best practices might have changed. You never know. So I
Also
think
in
like,
development, there's like a million ways to do something.
yeah,
So maybe it's not the best way in your particular use case.
that's the other issue too. So I think it's a good way to get you to a closer point to that solution, right? And it should help
Yeah.
you get you there, but it doesn't necessarily. It's not going to be like the thing always. I guess that's the way to say it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Were
yeah.
you gonna say
So
something,
an
Ben?
interesting thing that you can do when asking questions, and this is something that I oftentimes will do with Google, particularly asking programming questions to stay away from Stack Overflow, is you can use the advanced Google search operator site. So you just type your question, like, how do I find classes in React? And if you don't want answers from Stack Overflow, then you would just do minus site, and then either that's a colon or a semicolon, and stackoverflow.com.
Yeah. So you can remove them from your search. Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
That's a
awesome.
good one. Um, so yeah, so let's actually get sort of deeper into the topic. So if I didn't want to be one of those, noob developers who is just saying, how do I get started? Lol. Um, what would you guys suggest in terms of asking good questions so that you can actually get, like, let's say I wanted to post in the Code Noobs group a question that I'm having about my code. What would you guys suggest? How would you actually do that?
I would say first start by thinking about your audience and ask yourself, instead of thinking about like what's my problem, ask them how can I like make this problem clear to them? Because
Mm,
that's your first step in asking a question is getting clear about what is your actual question. Is it
yeah,
I have a problem with Python because I'm just so confused? Or is it like I have a specific obstacle I'm trying to overcome? Like, how come this function's not working in JavaScript? Okay, if it's something like that, then give as much data as you can. So if that might be a screenshot of your code, it might be a repo, it might be whatever. But you need to make sure, you need to keep in mind the audience that you're asking. It doesn't matter how expert they are, they need to have the information to understand the problem that you're trying to address. So I think getting clear about the problem and also as much data as you can provide is an important starting point.
yeah, I think that's a good point. What about you,
And then
Randy?
going from there, taking specific information that you have that's specific to your problem. So if you're getting an error message, copy the error message, put that in Google or
Mm,
ChatGPT. If you're trying to do something with a certain text or a certain program or a certain flag or a certain anything, insert that into ChatGPT. It'll do the complete prompt for you, and then you won't have to figure out how to put everything together on your own. So like
yeah,
the more specific information that you can give that's targeted towards your problem, the better answer you're going to end up getting.
yeah. I think one thing that I see a lot too is people will add part of their code and not all of it. So they'll be like, I'm having an issue with JavaScript. And then they'll just take a screenshot of one tiny piece of the JavaScript code. But generally, your code relies on other parts. Like, like one line of code is not enough for somebody to diagnose what's going on. You might need to show that whole JavaScript file, your HTML file, your CSS file, even maybe like a screenshot of the output, like the web browser. And if you can, just include a link to the whole repo so that people can look through it. I think that's super helpful because yeah, like it's going to be difficult to just diagnose off of one line of code for most scenarios.
Well, yeah, you could have a
and
problem, right, with how you're linking things, right? I mean, we had that issue,
Yeah.
like, could be that. And so it might be your code's fine, your JavaScript, but the problem is in your HTML or something. Yeah, you need to see all of it to get to the solution.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and a helpful tip for people, because learning GitHub can be a big obstacle for people, and we help a lot of people with that in our
Yeah.
web dev incubator, because that's something that as you become a developer, you need to know inside and out. But like getting started, it can be very, very confusing to get stuff working in GitHub.
Yeah.
So if you want to share all of your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of that, you can just create a code pen at codepen, I think
Mm.
it's .io, and then you can
Mhm.
Yeah.
share that link with people, and then they can see everything, and you don't have to worry with
All in
messing
one
around
spot.
with
Yeah.
GitHub.
Yeah.
And what's nice about CodePen too is if you guys haven't used that, it's a great place to like, it's basically just like a sandbox for web development. But the nice thing about that is that if you share a link to that, somebody can clone your CodePen and then
Yeah.
edit their own version of your code. So they're not changing your code, but they can, find the solution and then share it back to you, which is really nice. I know Chris is using that inside our group. He's doing like a Sudoku app. So that was nice for him to be able to share that because then all of us can sort of work on that or edit his code without affecting his code itself. So that's a great suggestion. I like that.
Yeah. Do you guys have, because I think this is also an important thing, like we mentioned this briefly, but like, what's your rule of thumb when you're working on your own for when you reach out to somebody else or to a documentation? Like, because like, look, you can sit and whatever, right? But there's a point where you got to reach out to documentation or AI or Google. When do you do that? When do you
Yeah.
stop
I
trying
try
yourself?
and do it right before I rage quit.
You probably do it a
Right?
little sooner than that. Just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there you go. It's Chris put in the comments, codepen.io. Yeah, it's a great website to use.
it is a great website.
Um, yeah, you should probably do that before you get to the rage quit part.
Yeah,
But
right.
I'm such a good developer, I don't ever ask questions.
No need.
I haven't read
I mean,
documentation in
because
like over a
you know
year.
what?
Yeah, no,
Yeah. You don't want people to know how stupid you are, so you just don't open your mouth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Now, I mean, we were talking about this actually before we got on the call, which I think is interesting. Like Randall, you're talking about how in the
Oh yeah,
sort of
let me share.
camp
Let me
that you're
share. So
in. Okay.
I'm taking an OSCP boot camp right now, because that's like a big exam for anyone in ethical hacking, and it's a challenging exam. The motto for the company, Offensive Security, is try harder, and a ton of people don't pass it the first time. Like there's a few people in my boot camp right now who didn't pass it the first time. So it's definitely a challenging exam. But there's about 20 people in my class, and routinely there's me and two other people who ask questions. And that's it. Everybody else is silent. And
Yeah.
it's just like it's not possible that they don't have questions, because I've been doing this stuff for a long time. Already have a master's in cybersecurity, already top 1% on Try Hack Me. So I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I still have questions. And a lot of these people are green around the gills. There's no chance they don't have questions,
Yeah.
and
So why do you
it's
think they're not asking questions?
because they don't want to look stupid like me.
yeah. What's funny though? That's a big part. Is like I think a lot of people get involved in this stuff because I've taught for a long time, so I know the signs, right? When people aren't asking
Yeah.
questions, it's either they're confused, they're scared, or they're bored. And bored's
Yeah.
fine. Like, look, in college, you might be taking a class you don't necessarily, you're not that interested. That's fine.
Sure.
And you got to get through things sometimes. But it's sad too because like the people that will always do better are the ones that ask questions because they're getting their specific problems addressed and they're
Yeah.
getting rid of their confusion, whereas everybody else is just staying confused and just barely hanging on to what's going on. And they just get further and further behind. We saw it with our cohort too when we did the boot
Oh
camp.
my
Remember,
God.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Bryce just said
Bryce that.
successful people, right? They ask questions, they do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And I thought about this when we were talking about it before, is like one of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't ask questions is because they're scared to look stupid, right? To look dumb and to be embarrassed or whatever it is. And
Or
to
frustrated
me
with
it's silly.
themselves, right? Because they feel like they should be getting it and they're not or something like,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it seems silly to me because it's like I can't remember the last time I asked a question and somebody came up to me afterwards and was like, haha, you're so dumb for asking that question. Like it's just yeah, like it's just never happened, right? That doesn't happen. So it is this sort of irrational fear that we
You
have.
asked
And
a
it's
question. What
understandable.
are you, a nerd?
Yeah. If anything, you're gonna get somebody who's like, "Hey, thanks so much for asking that question. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask too, but I didn't."
Dude,
Right?
that's the
That
truth though.
happens a lot.
If you have a question, there's guaranteed at least several other people in that room have the exact same question.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
especially with learning, like, oh my God, it happens all the time and it's a shame. But I think that's
Yeah,
one of the biggest challenges is people have to get over themselves too. And we're always our worst enemy. We are. We always
totally.
get in our own way. We always mess everything up. And like it's the same with asking questions. Like we make ourselves so scared of doing it that we end up missing out on things that could change our lives and make our lives better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You have a
I think
question,
an
Randall?
important part, yeah, question. I think an important part of asking questions is actually it's an iterative process. So it actually builds on itself. Like I notice this a
Mm,
lot more with ChatGPT prompts, but even with Google, because you ask a question and then you don't get what you're looking for. And you need to figure
yes.
out how to ask more specifically so you get a targeted answer that you're looking for. And that,
Yeah.
especially with AI, it can be an iterative process because you get kind of close but not really. And then you get closer and then not really. And then a little bit closer and eventually you might get there. Or I had a funny experience the other day where, ChatGPT just told me it's not possible. You can't do that. You need to write this really long, complex script. And I looked up the documentation and it was just like a simple flag, like a -D or something like that, attack D.
Yeah.
And I was like, actually, it's just attack D. And ChatGPT's like, oh yeah, you're correct. I was like, what the heck?
No,
Sometimes,
but
sometimes when you get stuff like that, like I probably would have gone to like pretend it is possible. What would you do then?
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Right?
good. Well, it did give me a way to do it, but basically I had to write this whole huge bash script to do it because I
Yeah.
was doing stuff with mutating word lists to where
Mm,
like it would take a password and it would just like double it. It would, if the password was password, it would then be password, something like
uh,
that. And ChatGPT is
yeah.
like, that's not possible. I need to do that and I need to reverse it as well. And
Yeah.
ChatGPT is like, it's not possible, but you can take the whole word list. And I need to do this for the rocku.txt word list, which is like
Yeah.
millions of lines.
Massive. Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
like, you could just run it through this bash script and create another file. And I was like, yeah, I could do that, but there's got to be an easier
It
way.
seems like it might use up a lot of bandwidth on my computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I wanted to get
That
back to, go ahead, Danny, before
I just
I,
wanted to say no, your point too about like and both your points about ChatGPT is a good one, like where I think the more you ask questions too, the better you get at phrasing questions and
yeah.
finding ways to rephrase like 90% of the time when like students ask me questions, like my job is just to rephrase it and make it into a question that makes sense because they're struggling with
Yeah.
how to word it. And I think that's also one of the problems that keeps people from asking questions is you just don't have the language yet because you're new, you're learning. And so you don't have the language yet to say it precisely and it gets frustrating. But just try because like you said with ChatGPT, right? Sometimes you say like pretend it's possible. Like you're just changing one word, but it changes so much
Yeah.
about it that it makes it possible to get a response.
Yeah, totally. I wanted to get back to your actual question that we sort of strayed from, which is like, how do you decide when to ask a question? And uh, especially in coding, I mean, for me, it's a lot of times like so generally when I'm coding, I have the documentation open for whatever resource
Yeah.
I'm using. So if I'm using like a JavaScript framework or a UI library or something like that, I generally just start by having that open in
Wait, is that
one of my
because you use
monitors.
dual monitors too, right? So I have one of my
Yes.
monitors with all my tabs, right, with all your
Yes.
documentation open. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And so I'll start with that because I think ChatGPT is great, but sometimes you get, like you said, Randall, some weird, good morning, Matthew. You get some like weird answers from ChatGPT, right? Where you'll get like probably not the best solution. I've gotten this a lot in with like Firebase, where I'll ask it a question and then it gives me some weird solution. And because Firebase is updated pretty frequently, it might be out of date. So I like to just have the documentation open and you can search through documentation too. So you don't have to just like
yeah.
read everything. You can actually search by terms. And then, if I run into more issues, then I generally go to ChatGPT. And then of course, the times that I'm generally asking somebody else for help is other developers that I'm working with, because it usually has something to do with their code and how they structured something. And so they taught us this thing in our boot camp, which I think is pretty good, which is a 20-minute rule. So if you're
I
working
actually
on
was that
something,
was one of their best things
yeah,
that
I
they
think that
had,
was like
right?
probably the best thing is like if you're working on something for 20 minutes and you don't find the answer, it's probably a good time to not rage
Rage
quit.
quit.
Yeah, all right.
Not rage quit, but it's time to ask somebody for help.
Yeah,
And it's important to be able to structure that help in a certain way so that people understand how to answer you better.
I like that 20-minute thing too, because and it could be any number, but like it's good because it's enough time where you've tried on your own, honestly, to solve this problem by looking at documentation, by
Yeah.
trying out different approaches. And, yeah, if it's been 20 minutes and you're just trying and you're not getting closer, you're probably not, it's helpful to just because you're going to get frustrated. And that's the other thing that you have to
Yeah.
guard against when you're learning, right? Is rage quitting. You don't want to get
Yeah.
yourself to a place where you feel like nothing's working. You get upset, depressed, because that just makes it worse. You're better off just going out and
Exactly.
asking then to then, figure it out.
Yeah. So I think we've talked quite a bit about how to ask questions, but we have a
Maybe we should
bunch
answer
from
questions.
Bryce. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I see Matthew just added one to the chat. If you guys do have any questions, throw them in the chat right now. We're going to spend the next like 10 minutes or so just answering questions. I'll read some of the ones that we have in the group. Also, like, just so that you know, moving forward, we're going to be sort of opening this call up to more questions. So if you do have them throughout the week, feel free to put them in there. We'll be including, a post every week where you can drop questions in there, and you don't
And
have to
and
be
the
here
the
live.
top line
Yeah.
of the post will say, if you cannot make the live stream, post your questions below.
Yeah, you don't
Just
Yeah.
so we're
have to
clear.
be here. Because literally we had people in the group who were like, I was like, hey, you don't have to be here. The replay will be here. You can ask your question. They're like, man, I wish I could ask a question, but I won't be there live. So you can ask them. You can ask the questions and we'll answer them, even if you're not here. Okay. So the first question, I think I'm going to start with Bryce. You said, when starting out, would you recommend learning WordPress as a stepping stone? Did having that experience with WordPress help you as a developer, or is it different animals? I see a lot of WordPress jobs on sites like Upwork, though I am more interested in coding side of development. Doesn't mean I wouldn't use it as a stepping stone if it's worth the time to get to know it. What do you
I would
guys think?
s- I would say like, low code solutions like WordPress, Squarespace and stuff, they're a great way to get your foot in the door, to start meeting clients, meeting people, start getting that side of the experience, but also just to learn like what does a good website look like. They can be
Yeah,
really helpful to design, and I still use them sometimes to come up with ideas. Like I'll just
yeah,
cruise through their
totally.
templates because their templates are good. They're made by professional people that know what they're doing. So yeah, I think it's a great place, to start out and even just to get ideas.
Yeah. Um, I agree with that one. I think WordPress is, so I started using WordPress years ago, probably like 10 or 15 years ago. And that I think is one of the main reasons why I understand what's going on behind the scenes so well. I don't think WordPress has as much power in terms of like templates because it's a lot of like build your own stuff.
Mhm.
But it did help me start to understand how the pieces of a website work together and engage with each other and like what each thing does, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. WordPress is also built on PHP. So, PHP isn't used very frequently anymore in web development. So if you are changing things in there, you're going to have to learn some PHP if you want to customize it a lot and start like coding with WordPress. So that's sort of a downside because you likely won't use PHP too much. Um, but it is a great way to sort of get yourself started understanding how hosting works and things like that because
Yeah.
we talk about a lot of like coding and development, but the other side of that is how do you actually host your code somewhere so that the world can see it. And so that's sort of how I learned some of that was through WordPress. um, in terms of work though, I wouldn't recommend Upwork too much. You're going to compete against a lot of people in like countries like India and Pakistan who are willing to work for next to nothing. So it's very difficult to find work there. And also people who've been there long enough that they just get most of the jobs, because generally when people go on Upwork, they look at how many previous jobs you've done. So it's really hard to break into some of those sites. But I would recommend some of the low code solutions like Squarespace. I think that one's great because of exactly what Danny said, which is they have amazing templates that are created by actual web designers. And you can start to see how, what great web design looks like and how users expect to engage with that. Also, it's a lot easier to use than WordPress. WordPress can be very confusing and it is not very intuitive.
It also gives you a sense of what's possible. Like what kind of
Yes.
designs are actually, possible to create with code. Because like at first,
Yeah.
like that confused me at first. Like very early on, I was like, can I actually make that thing? And
Yeah.
yeah, it gives you a
You
good
made
idea
me
of what you can do.
think of this too. This week I just added a video into our curriculum about CSS and how to build a portfolio for yourself using CSS, right? Even if you're like very new. And one of the things that I mentioned in there was that you can basically do anything under the sun with
Yeah,
CSS. Like
it's
I thought the
It's
same thing. Like
impressive.
I thought I was very limited in what you can do. You can literally change anything on a website with CSS. So there's always some way to do it. It's just finding that way.
Literally, if you think it's
But
possible, it can be done. It's amazing. Like, because and
yeah,
I think back to like when we started out, it was like when I first started with computers, basic HTML, you could do nothing. I mean, so
no,
it's like, yeah,
exactly.
there was a lot of limitations, and I think that's changed so much. It's amazing.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend trying WordPress, Squarespace. Also, if you are looking for templates, I recommend Canva too. They have a lot of great
Yeah,
like
they're good ones.
site templates in there that look really nice. And just start building some that you see, right? Because you're going to practice those skills by seeing somebody's template, and that's a lot of what's going to happen if you become a web developer. Is somebody's just going to hand you, some file and say make this on a computer, like on a browser, and that's going to be your job. So if you can just take a template from Canva and say I'm going to just build this today, that's a great practice. Go ahead, Randall.
Also, for everyone starting out and those people who aren't just starting out, you learn it, learn Squarespace by making yourself a website about
Yeah.
you, and then ask your family who wants a website.
Yep.
You might find some people, they might have connections, business people who need websites for their businesses. All of a sudden, you've made 4 or 5 websites on Canva. Guess what? You're a legitimate web developer already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, you don't need to code from HTML to be a web developer, honestly. If you can make someone a website, you're a web developer in my eyes. So, yeah, I would lean into that stuff as much as possible. What's next? More from Bryce. Bryce said, when venturing out as a freelance web developer, is there enough of a liability to create an LLC, or do you feel it is fine using a DBA? You create an LLC, if so, early on or later? It's a great question.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't think you
We're
need
not
one
lawyers.
immediately. Yeah, we're
We're not
not
lawyers.
lawyers, first of all, so
But
let's
No.
make that clear. But I mean, I would say it depends a lot on what websites you're building. If you're building simple websites for people, it's probably enough to have maybe your own website with a privacy and terms, like privacy policy and terms. Um, but the liability is, maybe misrepresenting somebody's business. I think that's the biggest liability that you could probably get yourself into. The other things would be accessibility, but that's like a people talk about that like it's a big thing. Like if you don't have alt tags on your website, you could get sued for that. But I've never heard of anyone getting sued for not having alt
No.
tags on a website.
I mean,
Um,
I would think
yeah,
about it too. Like if it's a side thing, I wouldn't worry about it. If you're leaning into it as your full, if that's what
yeah,
you're doing full time, yeah, you probably do need one at that point, just because of taxes and
yeah.
everything. It does make things easier. It takes that pressure off of you for being worried. But again, we're not lawyers, so keep that in mind. But
Yeah.
but
You
also,
can
like,
ask ChatGPT.
yeah,
you
I
should
don't know.
never create a, I mean, again, this is just personal advice from creating a whole bunch of businesses, but like you should never create an LLC for a business until long after it's profitable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So like don't even think about doing that stuff, because what's somebody going to come after? I mean, even if they came after you personally, they couldn't, because this is business related type of stuff. And then what are they going to try? Like, they have to pay for the whole lawsuit anyways. What could you possibly do to somebody creating a
Yeah.
website for them that would make them come after? It just doesn't
That's
make sense. So
that's
like wait
why
until it.
I
Yeah.
think it has to do a little bit with the scope of the website. Like if it's just like a simple business website, which is what we recommend starting out with, like you're building somebody a landing page for their business that just says like the hours and stuff like that.
Maybe as a
When
menu,
you get
yeah,
into like
yeah.
more advanced like web apps where you're taking payments and things like that, or like doing, handling sensitive data, maybe I think it makes more sense then to do it. But you're as a new developer, you're probably going to be starting with basic websites. And in that scenario, I don't think you really need an LLC.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed. Next
All
question.
right. Last one. Well, I am eager to learn and eager to build my portfolio to get projects. When I go on sites like Upwork, it appears they're inundated with competition from all over the world. Feel like that would be tough to get my first couple of
Mhm.
jobs because of that. My thought is that
Because here's the thing. Yeah, there's tons of competition from all over the world, but there's next to zero competition locally where you live. And that's
yeah,
who
Yeah.
people want to do business with. They don't
that's
want to do
basically
business
what
with
he
somebody who
said.
can barely speak. Yeah, they don't want to do business with somebody who can barely speak English and who they'll never know if they'll get in contact with, who probably is just telling them they can do something even though they can't. They would prefer to meet somebody in flesh and blood who they could have a real conversation with, sit down with, tell them exactly what they want, and then have them build exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we always recommend that. Like when you're starting out, start out with local businesses because you live locally. That's always a benefit for you when you're in your local environment. And there's accountability. They can reach out to you. They can actually talk to you. They can actually talk to you on the phone. Like
yeah,
if they have a question, they can get it answered. So like it's much easier to start out that way, I think. And like Russ already mentioned too, you're going to be competing with people that can charge next to nothing because their cost of living is way different. So
yeah,
it is very hard to get work on there.
But
That's going to be viable.
you all of a sudden become like once you start going with local businesses, you all of a sudden become your local web developer. And then
totally.
anybody who's looking for a website comes to you. Like I remember when I used to do real estate wholesaling, I would go to these meetings with a whole bunch of real estate investors, and there would be like two accountants there, two lawyers. Guess who everybody went to? Hundreds of real estate investors went to these two accountants and two lawyers because they were the ones who showed up and they became
Yeah,
known as the accountant and the lawyer for real estate investors, and they did a ton of business. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing if you start doing websites because you do a handful of websites in your community, all of a sudden, I mean, not only do you have that to show anybody who's a potential client, but other people will see your website, it'll have your link down on the bottom, and then they'll find you.
And
yeah,
all local businesses talk to each other. Every like literally they
yeah,
do. Like I see it, it's funny. We have a local coffee shop here, and every morning all the people that run local businesses they come in at the same time and they all chat and so yeah, you get one person do a good job, you'll get others, and you become that person. It's great.
yeah. I think a lot of developers underestimate your local market. I mean, it is. I promise you, it's not worth it to go on Fiverr or Upwork or whatever and try to compete. You're just not going to make any money doing that. And it's going to be a hassle because a lot of times also the people who are going on that website expect to pay $100 and get Airbnb built for them.
Yeah.
Like they want something crazy built for nothing. I've had people do that before where they're like, hey, I just trying to make this simple website. And it's like, autotrader.com. They're like, I
Yeah.
want it to look like this. I'm like, what? They're like, I have $100 budget. That's what you're going to get a lot of on those websites.
Yeah.
But what you said in here, Bryce, in this comment is spot on. And he was basically saying, should I be looking at local businesses? Yeah, I think you should build yourself a website first using a low code solution if you have to, and you can even brand it around your town or your local city or whatever large city is around you. Like you could do like, I don't know, Cincinnati web
Ooh,
design, right?
oh my goodness. And this is the coolest thing. Back when I did SEO, I landed so many plastic surgeon clients because I would just
Yeah,
have a plastic surgery website and then I made a page for every single large city in the US. And whatever
exactly.
pages ranked, I just went and I called plastic surgeons of those cities and did that. And you could do the same thing for every city around you. You could just
Yeah.
have like, your name, Bryce, web developer, and then you could have a page for, every single city close to you, and eventually some of them will rank and people will start contacting you.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I think people underestimate their local network. right? Your own personal network. And we're scared to do that, but it's really the best thing to get started. Ask your family, ask your friends, ask everybody that you know if they need a website.
Most
And
people do.
yeah, and then you
Like,
can literally just go on Google after that, and just start looking through local businesses. Choose one business category like construction or power washing or whatever it is. Choose a business category. Look at all those businesses, like type that in, power washing and your city, and go through each of those listings. If they don't have a website, just call them and be like, hey, I'm a local web designer. I'm offering super cheap websites right now because I'm just trying to build my portfolio. Would you like me to build you a website? Here's my website and some examples that I have of websites I build. I guarantee you'll find work pretty quickly doing that. And these people also, if you're getting, if you're local and you're getting a business in the US, you're going to get paid way more. People are more than willing. I mean, one of the first jobs I ever got as a web developer was while I was still in boot camp. Somebody paid me $2,500 to build them a website on Squarespace. Right. And it was just somebody that I knew. And
but
that's
think
it.
about it too, because a lot of local businesses too, like if they're running a business, they don't have time if they're a local business because they're there most of the time to deal with those. So even if it's low code, you don't have to feel bad about that because they don't have the time to go through that. And for somebody that doesn't understand it, that low code solution is still going to take them a while to put together. And it's still a hassle that they don't want to deal with. So, you can be that person that solves that problem.
Yeah. All right. Last question for the day before we take a break and then go to our mentoring
Yeah,
call.
oh, yeah.
What do you think about cloud security and is the skills required? Um, so
Hmm. I'll answer that.
Matthew, I'd say that's sort of a broad question, but I guess Randall would be suited to answer that.
Okay, so cloud security for your website, you just want to have some type of like endpoint protection. So like AWS has CloudFront, which protects you against DDoS attacks, that type of thing. Uh, or there's other stuff like Cloudflare, which
Mhm.
these types of things are for websites where you could be charged a lot of money running Lambda functions or running server instance time if you have a bunch of people, if you get a DDoS attack. For most single page websites, the worst is going to happen if you ever do get DDoS attack, which is a denial of service from a bunch of different places, is that your website won't be available for however long. But DDoS attacks aren't free. So whoever's doing it against you, it costs them money to be attacking your site. So there's no real reason to worry about that. If that's what you meant by your question. The other thing about cloud security. So like the because cloud everything is transitioning to the cloud, it is a newer form of technology. It is less secure just because there's default insecurity built into it. Like there's public S3 buckets on Amazon that if you don't set up the permissions correctly, other people can access your data.
Mhm.
So if you're interested in learning about cloud security and how best to secure it, Amazon has some really cheap certifications. Like I did the AWS developer exam. I did the AWS, they have three other ones, and I've done two of the three other ones. I forget what they're called, but uh, there's that. Also, Try Hack Me has a brand new cloud security academy. So like it's more expensive than regular Try Hack Me. I think for 3 months it's like $400, but you can learn literally everything you need to know about IAM permissions, about buckets, and all this different stuff just to make sure you're doing the most secure thing ever. But in terms of in general cloud security, you have to think that these large companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they are interested in security. So for the most part, it's going to be pretty secure. It's just there are some default configurations for things that if you are using them, you just need to make sure you're doing security best practices. And this is where asking ChatGPT a good question could be helpful because you could say, hey, I just created this on AWS. What are the security best practices to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah.
And you'll get all the
Yeah.
answers you need.
Yeah. Um I use Firebase a lot. That's like one of my main, in my main tech stack. And they make it really easy to handle security, because they basically all their API keys are public. And then you handle all the rules on the back end, which you as admin have only the access to. And I do that a lot with ChatGPT, where I'm like, I explain who I want to give access to and then ask it to write the Firebase rules. And basically they lock down all the API endpoints so that, those rules lock down the API endpoints so that I don't have to handle a lot of that security. So I don't think you have to like learn clouds. If you're trying to do web development, I don't think you have to learn cloud security from the start. But I would recommend, like what you said, Randall, is using one of these large companies to do that, because you're never going to be better than one of them at security, right? And I've talked to other developers about this who are like, we want to build, our own database and build our own security protocols. You're just never going to be better than that, right? So
No,
I
no
would
way.
recommend using those. I hope that answered everybody's questions. If you do have more questions, you can ask them in next week's post, or if you'd like, you can also put them in the comments here, and we'll answer them
You
next
can
week.
also make a post in the group, and
You can
somebody will
also
probably
make a
answer.
post
Yeah,
in the group.
you can
Yes, you
also do
can.
that any time of week. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Just make sure it says general and non-specific as possible, like
Yeah.
problem Python question
10,
exclamation mark.
10 codes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're running a little bit over. I want to make sure that we have a little break before we go to our web dev incubator. If you
Did
guys
somebody
are
say web dev incubator?
I did.
What is that?
what is
Web
it?
dev incubator is your best shot at becoming a web developer. That's what it is. If you guys are
Right.
interested, basically, it's a full curriculum to take you from zero to hero in web development, from absolutely knowing nothing at all through HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, databases, cybersecurity, all the important stuff that you need to know as a developer in today's modern world. We have a full curriculum. Right now, we are accepting people into the beta program at a much, much, much discounted price. So if you are interested, in the comments below, write question, and we will reach out to you, and
Nice.
we will tell you more about it. Basically, we guarantee that you're going to get a job in the next 12 months, and we walk you through that entire process from not knowing anything at all. We have some people in the group now who basically like barely know computers even, and that's totally cool. We're happy with that, right? We want you to start from whatever place you are, and we will bring you to where you want to be. We do all the quarterly planning. We make sure that you set your goals and you get your goals too. So if you are interested, drop the word question below here, and we will reach out to you directly. We'll have a little one-on-one call to explain to you what it's all about, if you're a good fit. And yeah, and Chris said you got to start somewhere, which is exactly right, Chris. You got to start somewhere. And today is the best day to start. So if you guys are curious, drop a comment. We'll reach out to you. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great Saturday. If you are in the incubator, we will send you the link inside the private Telegram group, which is another thing that you get in there. You get access to us 24/7. Anytime you have a question, you can ask us directly. And people love taking advantage of that. So, yeah, so we'll drop the link in there, and you guys can join us for our 2-hour call where we just answer all your questions directly and help you with your coding one-on-one, all that good stuff. So, with that, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Code Noobs live stream. It's not really
Nice.
an episode; it's just like a call. But all right, guys, thank you.
Later.
Peace. Have a good Saturday.
Later.
See you next week, bright and early at 9 a.m.